Elton Wilson, a 62-year-old retired history teacher, sat at a table in a small diner on the outskirts of St. Louis. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his old-fashioned jacket carried the faint scent of tobacco and autumn dampness. Before him sat a cold cup of coffee and a newspaper with the headline, "Another protest downtown. Is there a limit to patience?" Elton sighed, adjusting his glasses. He'd seen too many such headlines in his lifetime. The diner was packed. Nearby tables buzzed with arguments about politics. Someone laughed loudly, and a waitress clattered plates, rushing between customers. Outside, the sound of rain mingled with the hum of cars. Elton loved this place for its authenticity. No pretension like the downtown restaurants, just regular people trying to get by. He'd just opened the newspaper when the diner's door swung open sharply. A young man, about 25, entered, wearing a soaked hoodie. His name was Quentin Thomas, black, with a sharp gaze and tense shoulders. Quentin wasn't a regular, but Elton had seen him before. The young man worked at the local community center, organizing activities for kids. Always quiet, but with a spark in his eyes. Quentin sat a few tables away, tossing his backpack onto a chair. The waitress, an older woman named Rita, approached with a smile. "Coffee or something stronger, Quentin?" she teased. "Just water, Rita. Long day," he replied, pulling off his wet hood. His voice was low, tinged with fatigue. Elton returned to his paper, but his attention was drawn by the sound of an approaching police siren. Blue and red lights flashed past the window. A few diners exchanged glances, and one man muttered, "Something's up again." The siren faded nearby, and moments later, the diner's door opened again. A police officer entered, a white man in his 40s with a hard expression. His badge read Officer Griffin. He was in uniform, hand resting on his holster. Rain dripped from his cap onto the floor. The diner fell silent, only the blues from the speakers playing on. Griffin scanned the room and locked eyes on Quentin. The young man sat, staring at the table, but his fingers tightened around his water glass. "You," Griffin said loudly, pointing at Quentin. "Get up. We need to talk." Elton frowned, feeling a familiar anger rise in his chest. He'd seen scenes like this too often, but something in Griffin's demeanor put him on edge. The officer wasn't just confident, he was aggressive, as if looking for a fight. Quentin slowly raised his eyes. "Can I ask what this is about?" His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Don't play games with me," Griffin snapped, stepping closer. "We got a call. Someone matching your description just robbed a store 2 blocks from here. Backpack, hoodie, it all fits." "Get up," I said. The diner went deathly quiet. Rita froze with a coffee pot in hand, and a few patrons shifted away from their tables. Elton's heart pounded. He knew situations like this could explode in an instant. Quentin didn't move. "I've been at the community center all day," he said, enunciating each word clearly. "I have witnesses. I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's going on." Griffin's jaw clenched, and he placed a hand on his gun. "You don't tell me what to do," he growled. "Get up, or I'll make you." Elton couldn't stay silent. He stood, clutching his newspaper. "Officer, calm down," he said, his voice firm but even. "The young man's sitting here, drinking water. You're making serious accusations, but it sounds like you don't have evidence." Griffin whipped around to face Elton. "And who the hell are you? Sit down, old man, before I arrest you for obstruction." "I'm Elton Wilson, history teacher with 30 years' experience," Elton replied, holding Griffin's gaze. "And I know you can't just drag someone out from behind a table without cause." "State your grounds, officer." Griffin's face reddened with fury, but before he could respond, the diner's door opened a third time. 2 young black men entered, Quentin's friends, Elton guessed. One, tall and muscular, named Darius, sized up the situation immediately. "What's going on, Quentin?" he asked, his voice taut. "Officer thinks I robbed a store," Quentin said, not taking his eyes off Griffin, "even though I've been working all day." The other man, Lamar, stepped forward. "Are you serious?" Again, his voice trembled with outrage. "How many times does this have to happen?" Griffin turned sharply toward them. "Back off, or I'm calling for backup," he shouted, pulling his gun from its holster, but keeping it lowered. That move was the spark. Darius lunged forward instinctively, grabbing Griffin's arm to keep the gun down. Lamar joined in, trying to pull the officer back. Quentin leapt to his feet, yelling, "Stop! Darius, Lamar, stop!" The diner erupted into chaos. Patrons screamed. Rita dropped the coffee pot, which shattered on the floor. Elton rushed to Quentin, grabbing his shoulder. "Don't get involved, son. It'll only make things worse." But Quentin broke free. Instead of joining the fray, he stepped between Griffin and his friends, raising his hands. "Everyone, calm down." His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Darius, Lamar, let him go. Officer, lower your weapon. Nobody here wants trouble." Griffin, still restrained by Darius and Lamar, was breathing heavily. His eyes blazed with rage, but he slowly lowered his gun. Darius and Lamar stepped back, their fists still clenched. Quentin faced Griffin, looking him in the eye. "I didn't rob any store. I have an alibi, and I'm willing to answer your questions. But you can't just point a gun at people. That's not the way." Griffin snorted, but his hand was shaking. "You don't lecture me," he muttered, his earlier confidence waning. Elton stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. "Officer, I saw everything. This young man didn't resist. Your actions were unwarranted, and I'm not the only witness." Rita, still behind the counter, nodded. "I've got it all on my phone," she said, holding up her smartphone. "Everything's recorded." Griffin clenched his jaw, glancing around. Every eye in the diner was on him, some with anger, others with fear. He realized he was cornered. "This isn't over," he hissed, backing toward the door. "I'll be back." When the door slammed shut behind him, the diner exploded with chatter. Darius and Lamar rushed to Quentin, checking if he was okay. Elton returned to his table, his hands trembling. He knew this incident wouldn't fade quietly. Quentin sat down, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at Elton. "Thank you for stepping in," he said quietly. Elton nodded. "I couldn't just sit and watch. But you handled it right. You kept it from spiraling." Quentin gave a small smile, but his eyes remained serious. "I'm tired of this, Mr. Wilson. My whole life, I've had to prove I'm not a criminal. But I don't want blood spilled over it." Rita approached, holding a fresh cup of coffee for Elton. "That video's already online," she said. "People need to see this." Elton looked at Quentin. "You ready for what's coming next?" he asked. Quentin sighed, staring out the window where the rain still pounded the asphalt. "I don't know, but I'm not going to stay silent." Elton Wilson followed him out, his old jacket creaking as he adjusted it. The retired teacher's face was etched with concern, but his eyes held a spark of determination that Quentin hadn't noticed before. Behind them, Darius and Lamar lingered near the diner's entrance, their voices low but heated as they debated what to do next. The video Rita had recorded was already making waves online. Quentin had seen the notifications piling up on his phone. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Quentin and hashtag Esta Lewis incident were trending, and strangers were sharing clips of Officer Griffin's aggression. But Quentin wasn't sure he was ready for the storm that was coming. "You okay, son?" Elton asked, his voice gravelly but kind. Quentin nodded, though his jaw was tight. "I'm fine. Just trying to figure out what happens now." Elton glanced at the street, where a few passers-by were already whispering and pointing at the diner. "What happens now is up to you. That video's out there. People are watching. You've got a voice, Quentin. Question is, what do you want to say?" Quentin didn't answer right away. He looked down at his sneakers, scuffed and damp from the rain. He'd spent his whole life navigating moments like this. Moments where he had to prove he wasn't a threat, where a wrong move could cost him everything. But tonight felt different. He hadn't just survived the encounter with Griffin. He'd taken control of it. He'd stopped his friends from escalating, kept his cool, and walked away with his dignity intact. Maybe that was worth something. "I don't want this to be just another hashtag," Quentin said finally, his voice low but steady. "I'm tired of people posting videos, getting mad for a week, then moving on. If this is going to mean something, it's got to be more than that." Elton nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're preaching to the choir, son. I've seen too many marches, too many speeches. But you've got something most folks don't, a way of staying calm when the world's screaming at you to lose it. That's power." Quentin snorted softly, shaking his head. "Doesn't feel like power. Feels like survival." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Elton said. Before Quentin could respond, Darius and Lamar approached, their faces a mix of anger and urgency. Darius, the taller of the two, spoke first. "Man, we gotta do something," he said, his voice tight. "That cop's gonna come back, with his buddies. You know how this works. They'll spin it, say you provoked him. We can't just sit here." Lamar nodded, his eyes darting to the street. "I say we organize. Get people out here tomorrow. Show 'em we're not scared." Quentin held up a hand, his expression firm but not harsh. "Hold up. I hear you, both of you. But if we go out there swinging, it's gonna end the same way it always does. Cops in riot gear, tear gas, more people hurt. I'm not saying we do nothing, but we gotta be smart about this." Darius frowned, crossing his arms. "Smart? Man, being smart hasn't gotten us anywhere. You saw that cop's face. He didn't care about your alibis or your witnesses. He saw you and decided you were guilty. That's the game." "I know the game," Quentin said, his voice sharper now. "I've been playing it my whole life. But I'm not letting him or anyone push me into a corner where I lose everything. We're not just fighting one cop. We're fighting a system, and systems don't change because we burn stuff down. They change when we make them listen." Lamar raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "You think Griffin's gonna listen? Or his bosses?" "Maybe not," Quentin admitted. "But the people in that diner? The ones watching that video right now? They might. And if we can get them to listen, really listen, that's a start." Elton, who'd been quiet during the exchange, cleared his throat. "He's got a point. I've lived through enough of these fights to know that anger's a spark, but it burns out fast. You want real change, you need a plan. And you need people, ordinary people, not just the ones already on your side." Darius shook his head, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. "All right, Q. What's your plan then?" Quentin hesitated. He didn't have a plan. Not yet. But as he stood there, the cold air stinging his face, he felt a clarity he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid he worked with at the community center, every person who'd ever been profiled, every story, like his, that never made it to a viral video. He couldn't fix it all, but he could start somewhere. "I want to talk," Quentin said. "Not just protest, not just shout. I want to sit down with people, cops, community leaders, whoever's willing, and have a real conversation. No cameras, no hashtags, just truth." Lamar laughed, though there was no malice in it. "You're dreaming, man. Cops don't sit down for coffee and chats." "Maybe not," Quentin said, his eyes narrowing. "But I'm gonna try. And if they say no, we'll keep asking. We'll show up at their precinct, at City Hall, wherever. Not with fists, but with questions. They can't ignore us forever." Elton clapped a hand on Quentin's shoulder. "That's a start. And you won't be alone. I may be old, but I've still got some fight in me. I'll make some calls. Church groups, old colleagues. We'll get people behind you." Darius and Lamar exchanged a look, then nodded reluctantly. "We're in," Darius said. "But if this doesn't work, I'm not promising I'll stay calm next time." Quentin gave him a small smile. "Fair enough." The next morning, St. Louis woke to a city on edge. Rita's video had been shared thousands of times, picked up by local news stations, and even a few national outlets. Pundits debated whether Quentin was a hero or a troublemaker, while anonymous commenters flooded social media with vitriol. Officer Griffin's name was everywhere, along with calls for his suspension. But Quentin wasn't watching the news. He was at the community center, sitting in a cramped office with a notebook and a cup of lukewarm coffee. Elton had kept his promise. By noon, a small group of supporters had gathered, mostly older folks from local churches, a few teachers, and a handful of Quentin's colleagues from the center. They weren't a big crowd, but they were determined. Among them was Rita, who'd brought her laptop to show Quentin the latest comments on her video. "People are fired up," she said, scrolling through posts. "Some are saying you should sue. Others want to march downtown." Quentin shook his head. "No lawsuits, no marches. Not yet. I want to talk to the police chief first." Rita raised an eyebrow. "You think Chief Hargrove's gonna meet with you? After this?" "I don't know," Quentin admitted. "But I'm gonna ask. And I'm gonna keep asking until someone listens." Elton, sitting nearby, leaned forward. "I know Hargrove. Not well, but we crossed paths at a few community events. He's tough, but he's not unreasonable. If we approach this right, he might hear you out." Quentin nodded, scribbling a note. "Then we start with him. But we need to be clear about what we're asking for, not just an apology, but real changes. Training for cops, community oversight, something that actually makes a difference." The group spent the afternoon planning. They drafted a letter to Chief Hargrove, requesting a meeting. They reached out to local organizations, asking for support. And they prepared for the backlash they knew was coming. By evening, the community center was buzzing with activity, phones ringing, volunteers organizing, and Quentin at the center of it all, his calm presence keeping everyone focused. But not everyone was on board. That night, as Quentin walked home, he got a call from Darius. "You need to see this," Darius said, his voice tense. "Griffin's on the news. He's saying you and your thug friends attacked him. They're spinning it, man, saying you're the problem." Quentin's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Let's talk. We've got the truth on our side, and we're not backing down." He hung up, standing alone on the quiet street. The city lights stretched out before him, a mix of hope and uncertainty. He knew this was just the beginning. Griffin's lies, the media frenzy, the growing divide in the community, it was all part of the fight. But for the first time, Quentin felt ready. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had a purpose. Somewhere out there, people were watching. and maybe, just maybe, they were starting to listen. The next few days in St. Louis felt like the city was holding its breath. The diner incident had ignited a firestorm, with Quentin's face plastered across local news channels and social media feeds. Officer Griffin's interview, where he painted himself as the victim of an unprovoked attack, had rallied his supporters, mostly older, conservative residents, and a vocal contingent of police union members. They flooded comment sections with claims that Quentin and his friends were thugs who'd escalated a routine investigation. Meanwhile, the viral video told a different story, and Quentin's calm defiance in the face of Griffin's aggression had struck a chord with others, particularly younger residents and community activists. The city was split, and the tension was palpable. Quentin barely slept. He spent his mornings at the community center, coordinating with Elton, Rita, and a growing group of volunteers. They'd sent their letter to Chief Hargrove, requesting a meeting to discuss police reform, but the response had been a curt acknowledgement from a secretary. "The chief's office will review your request." No promises, no timeline. Quentin wasn't surprised, but he wasn't deterred either. He'd expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was the personal toll. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, supportive messages mixed with hate-filled texts and voicemails. "You're tearing this city apart," one anonymous caller hissed. "Go back to where you came from," said another, as if St. Louis wasn't the only home Quentin had ever known. He tried to shrug it off, but each message chipped away at his resolve. At night, alone in his small apartment, he'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if he was strong enough to keep going. Elton noticed the strain. On the fourth day after the incident, he pulled Quentin aside in the community center's cluttered meeting room. The air smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, and the hum of a space heater filled the silence. Elton sat across from Quentin, his weathered hands folded on the table. "You're carrying a lot, son," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't try to do it alone." Quentin rubbed his eyes, exhaustion etched into his face. "I'm fine, Mr. Wilson. Just a lot to handle." "You're not fine," Elton said bluntly. "I've seen that look before on kids in my classroom, on folks in the civil rights marches back in the 60s. You're pushing yourself too hard, and if you break, this whole thing falls apart. Talk to me. What's eating you?" Quentin hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "It's not just the hate messages or the waiting for Hargrove. I keep thinking about that moment in the diner. If I'd lost my cool, if Darius and Lamar hadn't backed off, it could have ended so differently. People could have gotten hurt, or worse. And now everyone's looking to me like I've got some grand plan, but I'm just trying to do the right thing." Elton leaned back, his eyes softening. "You think you're the first to feel that way? Every person who's ever stood up for something bigger than themselves has felt that weight. You're not supposed to have all the answers, Quentin. You're supposed to keep asking the right questions. And you're doing that." Quentin managed a faint smile. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Elton said with a chuckle. "But you've got people in your corner. Me, Rita, your friends, even folks you don't know yet. You're not fighting this alone." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Rita poked her head in, her expression a mix of excitement and urgency. "Quentin, you've got to see this. We just got an email from Hargrove's office. They want to meet. Tomorrow." Quentin's heart skipped a beat. "For real?" Rita nodded, holding up her phone. "It's not the chief himself, some deputy named Carter. But it's a start. They're proposing a closed-door meeting at the precinct. Just you, a couple of us, and their people." Elton raised an eyebrow. "Closed door? Sounds like they're trying to keep this quiet. Maybe, Quentin said, his mind racing. But it's a foot in the door. We take it. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at the downtown precinct, a squat, gray building surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. The morning was crisp, with a sharp wind cutting through Quentin's jacket as he arrived with Elton, Rita, and Darius. Lamar had wanted to come, but Quentin had asked him to stay back. He didn't want the group to seem confrontational. Darius, though reluctant, had agreed to keep his temper in check. Inside, the precinct smelled of disinfectant and old carpet. The group was led to a small conference room with fluorescent lights and a chipped wooden table. Deputy Chief Carter, a wiry man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed mustache, sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other officers. Carter's face was unreadable, but his posture was stiff, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Thank you for coming," Carter said, his tone clipped. "We're here to discuss the incident at the diner and find a way to move forward. Let's keep this civil." Quentin nodded, taking a seat across from Carter. "Appreciate you meeting with us. We're not here to point fingers. We want to talk about how things like this can be prevented." Carter's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gestured for Quentin to continue. Over the next half hour, Quentin laid out their concerns. The lack of de-escalation training for officers, the pattern of racial profiling in the community, the need for transparency and accountability. He spoke calmly, his words measured but firm, citing examples from his own experiences and those of others at the community center. Elton chimed in with historical context, drawing parallels to past struggles for justice, while Rita shared data from local advocacy groups about police misconduct complaints. The officers listened, though their expressions ranged from neutral to skeptical. Carter took notes, occasionally nodding, but his responses were vague, promises to review policies and consider training enhancements. Quentin could tell they were being placated, but he didn't push too hard. This was just the first step. Then Darius spoke up, his voice low but intense. "Look, I get that you're doing your job, but when I saw that cop pull a gun on my friend for no reason, I didn't see a system that protects us. I saw a system that's ready to take us out the second we step out of line. How do we trust that?" The room went quiet. Carter shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand your frustration," he said carefully. "But officers like Griffin are trained to respond to potential threats. The situation escalated because of the physical confrontation, which wouldn't have happened if he hadn't drawn his weapon," Quentin cut in, his voice steady but pointed. "I told my friends to back off, and they did. But Griffin didn't de-escalate. He doubled down. That's the problem we're talking about." Carter opened his mouth to respond, but one of the other officers, a woman named Lieutenant Ruiz, spoke first. "You're right," she said, surprising everyone. "I've seen the video. Griffin's approach was aggressive. He's on administrative leave, pending an investigation, but that's not enough. We need to do better." Carter shot her a look, but Ruiz didn't back down. "I'm not saying the department's broken, but we've got blind spots. I've been on the force 20 years, and I've seen too many situations like this. If we don't start listening to people like you, Mr. Thomas, we're just going to keep ending up here." Quentin felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a victory, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall. The meeting ended with Carter agreeing to schedule another discussion in 2 weeks, this time with community leaders and a broader group of officers. It wasn't the sweeping change Quentin wanted, but it was a start. Outside the precinct, the group gathered on the sidewalk, the wind whipping around them. Darius was still skeptical, but even he admitted the meeting hadn't been a total waste. Rita was already typing notes on her phone, planning to update their supporters. Elton, ever the optimist, clapped Quentin on the back. "You did good in there," he said. "Kept your cool, made your case. That's how you build something." Quentin nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. As they walked back to the car, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, and the words sent a chill down his spine. "You think you're a hero? Watch your back." He deleted the message, but the unease lingered. The city was watching, and not everyone was on his side. Still, as he looked at the faces of his small but growing coalition, Elton's steady resolve, Rita's fierce determination, Darius's reluctant hope, Quentin felt a spark of something stronger than fear. It wasn't euphoria, not yet, but it was close. It was the quiet certainty that he was on the right path, and no matter what came next, he wouldn't walk it alone. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Quentin believed they could win, not with fists or fire, but with words, persistence, and the truth. The weeks following the meeting at the precinct were a whirlwind for Quentin Thomas. St. Louis remained a city divided, its streets and airwaves crackling with debates over the diner incident. Officer Griffin's administrative leave had sparked protests from his supporters, who gathered outside City Hall with signs reading, "Back the Blue." Meanwhile, Quentin's call for dialogue had galvanized a different crowd: church groups, teachers, students, and small business owners who saw in him a voice for measured change. The community center became a hub of activity, with volunteers streaming in to help organize meetings, draft proposals, and amplify their message. But the threats didn't stop. Anonymous messages, graffiti on the center's walls, and late-night hang-up calls kept Quentin on edge. He didn't tell anyone, not even Elton, but the weight was there, a constant shadow. Despite the pressure, Quentin pressed forward. The second meeting with Deputy Chief Carter and Lieutenant Ruiz was scheduled for mid-November, this time with a broader group. Local pastors, a city council member, and representatives from a police reform advocacy group. Quentin spent hours preparing, poring over data on use of force incidents and community policing models. He wanted to be ready, not just to argue, but to build something tangible. Elton helped him refine his talking points, while Rita worked her magic online, turning their small movement into a local phenomenon. Darius and Lamar, though still wary of the police, took on roles organizing youth outreach, ensuring the next generation had a voice. The morning of the meeting dawned cold and gray, with a light drizzle slicking the streets of St. Louis. Quentin stood outside the community center, sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching the city wake up. The smell of rain and roasted beans mingled with the faint hum of morning traffic. He felt nervous but grounded. Like a boxer before a fight, he knew he could win. Elton joined him, his old jacket zipped up against the chill. "Big day," Elton said, his breath fogging in the air. "You ready?" Quentin nodded, a small smile breaking through. "As I'll ever be. Thanks for sticking with me, Mr. Wilson." Elton waved a hand. "Don't thank me. This is your show. I'm just here for the popcorn." Quentin laughed, the tension in his chest easing. They headed to the meeting together, joined by Rita, Darius, and a handful of others. The venue wasn't the precinct this time, but a neutral space, a community hall downtown, with high ceilings and rows of folding chairs. The room was half full when they arrived, a mix of skeptical officers, cautious city officials, and hopeful community members. Quentin scanned the crowd, noting Lieutenant Ruiz's presence and the absence of Deputy Chief Carter. In his place was Chief Hargrove himself, a broad-shouldered man with a reputation for being tough but fair. Quentin's pulse quickened. This was bigger than he'd expected. The meeting began with formalities, introductions, Ground rules, a plea for civility. Then Hargrove spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. "I'm here because I've seen the video," he said, addressing the room. "I've heard the concerns, and I know we've got work to do. But change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without trust. I'm hoping we can start building that today." Quentin felt a flicker of hope, but kept his guard up. He'd heard promises before. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, his notes untouched on the table. He didn't need them. He spoke from the heart, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "I'm not here to vilify anyone," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "I'm here because what happened in that diner wasn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been judged before they could speak, who's had to prove they're not a threat just to exist. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for fairness, for training that prioritizes de-escalation, for oversight that holds everyone accountable, for a system that sees us as people, not problems." He paused, letting the words settle. The room was silent, save for the faint patter of rain against the windows. Then he continued, his tone softening but no less firm. "I know this is hard. I know change is messy. But I believe we can do better, not by fighting each other, but by talking, listening, and working together. I'm willing to try. Are you?" The question hung in the air. Hargrove's expression was unreadable, but Lieutenant Ruiz nodded slightly, her eyes bright with something like respect. A pastor in the audience murmured, "Amen," and a few others clapped. But not everyone was swayed. An older officer in the back crossed his arms, his face a mask of skepticism. The city council member scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. Quentin knew this wasn't a victory. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. The discussion that followed was tense but productive. Hargrove agreed to pilot a de-escalation training program, with input from community leaders. Ruiz volunteered to lead a task force on transparency, promising to share data on police stops and complaints. The advocacy group pushed for a civilian review board, and while Hargrove didn't commit, he didn't dismiss it outright. Quentin listened, asked questions, and kept the conversation focused, even when tempers flared. By the end, they had a framework, not a solution, but a start. As the meeting wrapped up, Hargrove approached Quentin, extending a hand. "You've got guts, Mr. Thomas," he said, "and you've got my attention. This isn't the end of the conversation." Quentin shook his hand, meeting the chief's gaze. "I'm counting on that." That evening, the community center hosted a small gathering to debrief. The room was warm, filled with the aroma of pizza and the buzz of voices. Rita was on her laptop, live-streaming updates to their supporters. Darius and Lamar were joking with some of the younger volunteers, their usual guardedness replaced by cautious optimism. Elton sat in a corner, sipping tea, watching Quentin with a proud smile. Quentin stood at the front, addressing the group. "Today wasn't perfect," he said. "We didn't fix everything, but we got a seat at the table. That's more than we had a month ago. And we're not done. We keep showing up, keep talking, keep pushing. Because this isn't just about us. It's about the kids who come after us, the ones who deserve a better city." The room erupted in applause, and Quentin felt a rush of something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't euphoria, not quite, but it was close. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of change, knowing the road ahead would be long but worth it. Later, as the crowd thinned, Quentin stepped outside for air. The rain had stopped, and the sky was clear, stars piercing the darkness. He thought about the diner, about Griffin's gun, about the moment he'd chosen words over fists. He thought about the threats still lurking in his inbox, the skeptics who'd never listen, the work still undone. But he also thought about the people inside Elton, Rita, Darius, and the dozens of others who'd joined them. They were his strength, his reason to keep going. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed, a lonely sound that felt oddly comforting. Quentin took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, more meetings, more resistance, maybe more threats. But he knew he'd face it, not with anger or fear, but with the same quiet resolve that had carried him through that night in the diner. The city was still fractured, its wounds deep and raw, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, it felt like healing was possible. Not complete, not yet, but closer. And for Quentin, that was enough to keep fighting, one step, one conversation, one truth at a time.